Alright, so we're going to talk about JavaScript operators. And you probably will find that you already know what most of these operators are and what they do, even if you've never written a line of code in your life. By the end of this video, we're also going to come back and follow up on a problem that we were confronted with at the end of the last video, which was about if statements. And you can use an if statement to check and see if a variable got set or not. And this comes in handy a lot when you're programming. So we'll come back to that problem and we'll figure out how to solve it. Alright, so I've got the file that we're working with is called JavaScript-operators. Got it up in Sublime Text, and here's what it looks like on the web page. So it looks like this. Make sure you download the latest version of this file because it may be a little bit different from what you have already. But anyways, let's get started. So there's different types of operators. Right here are all the arithmetic operators, and these are the ones that you probably already know. We know how to use the plus sign to add numbers, the minus sign to subtract numbers, and then the asterisk, that's for multiplying, and then the forward slash is for dividing. But this is one that you may not know. It's the percent sign, and that's called the modulus operator, and we use that to find the remainder of something. So we jump back over to the code. Here's our table that displays all the operators. I'm going to scroll on down, and okay, I just wanted to add a little bit of code here. You guys will probably already have this when you downloaded the file, but anyways, I just wanted to show this modulus operator real fast here. So I've got an expression here, and we say this is 6 mod 2. So basically what this is going to do is give us the remainder for 6 divided by 2. So storing that in a variable called SumRemainder, and if I alert that, I bounce over to the browser, see what happens here. We see that the remainder of 6 mod 2 is 0. Okay, and that makes sense. There's no remainder because it's an even number, and you divide an even number by 2, and there is no remainder. Okay, so let's change this to 7 mod 2. So this will give us the remainder, and we'll see that the remainder is going to be 1. Alright, so you can use that modulus operator to give you the remainder. And that comes in handy because sometimes you need to figure out whether a number is even or odd. So you can write an if statement that uses the modulus operator to check to see if the remainder of some number mod 2 was equal to 0. Then you know that it's an even number. Okay, I think that's all we're going to cover in the basic arithmetic operators, because like I said, all the other ones should be pretty familiar to you. So I'm going to bounce back over to here, and there are some other shortcuts for these arithmetic operators. So we've got plus equals, minus equals, times equals, and slash equals, forward slash equals. So these might look kind of weird, but they're not that bad. So let's just take a look at some examples here. So right here on line 88, we're seeing that this operator, the plus equals operator. Maybe I should put spaces in here, make it a little bit easier to read. I'm not sure. Anyways, this is exactly the same as saying x equals x plus 2. So I've put that in this comment right here. So it's just a shortcut to save you a few little keystrokes. But if I want to increment x by 2, or if I want to raise the value of x by 2, I could either do it this way right here with x equals x plus 2. If you look at this, it makes sense. So I'm reassigning a value to x, and it's an expression, so we have to solve it. Currently, x is 3. X got set to 3 up here on line 84. So 3 plus 2 equals 5, and that will be the new value of x. Or I could just do this shortcut right here. X plus equals 2. That will add 2 to x. Okay. Now that goes for all those other operators in this group right here. So minus equal would be x equals x minus whatever's on the other side, on the right hand side. Same with these other ones. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about those. But we don't really use these ones much at all. I'm sorry, these three. But we use the plus equals quite a bit. And actually, where we use it a lot is with strings. And we'll see that in just a second. I've got a sample down below when we talk about that. We'll get there. But before we do, I want to talk about these two operators right here, the increment and decrement operators. So there's two of them. One's plus plus, and the other one's minus minus. And we use both of them quite a bit, but we especially use plus plus a lot. And I'll explain why in a second here. So here on line 93, I'm using x plus plus. So what this does is it takes the value of x, and by this time it's 5, because we started out with 3 here, then we added 2 to it here on line 88, and after this line runs, the value of it is going to be 6, because what this plus plus does is it just increments a value by 1. Alright, why do we need an operator just to increment a value by 1? I mean, there's a lot of other ways we could do it, but this is so common in programming that that it's handy to be able to do it with just these two little characters. And it's common, and we'll see why when we get to loops pretty soon, but a lot of times we'll loop through code. That means that we repeat the same code over and over again, and many times we use a counter, so we count how many times we loop, and that's where you'll use this this plus plus, or the increment operator, a lot, is when you're using loops. So I'll leave it up to you to go ahead and alert out what x is, but I'm pretty sure it'll be 6 at this point. And then we'll move on to the decrement operator, and you see that here, and that just reduces the number by 1. So at this point, x was 5 here after line 88, it's 6 here after line 93, and then after line 96 it's going to go back to 5 again. So those are the increment and decrement operators. Pretty straightforward. All right, now I'm going to go back to this plus equals operator one more time here. We know a little bit about string concatenation, although I don't think we formally talked about it, but you can combine strings together using the plus signs. So let me just throw in another example here. This is going to throw my line numbers off, but it'll be okay for you. I'm going to do var str1 equals hi, and then I'm going to declare and initialize another var str2 equals hi there, or I'm sorry, there. And we know what will happen if I do an alert here of str1 plus str2. I think we all know what we're going to see there. It'll be a string that says hi there, even though it's going to be squished together because we don't have a space in there. If I wanted to put the space in there, I could do it like this. But what this is called string concatenation. You can just think of it as combining strings together, and we do a lot of this in programming. And in web developing in particular, when you think about it, an HTML file is nothing but a string. So we can do a lot by manipulating strings in programming. Here's an example of string concatenation right here on line 108. Let me go ahead and comment this out. So we're done with that. You can run it and see what happens. But a lot of times we're building big, huge strings, and this happens to be a string where we're going to create a table. So we create a string that represents a table, and then soon you'll learn how to write some code that actually injects this table into your web page. So a lot of times when we're trying to build HTML, we do it as a string, and then once we get it all built as a string, we can convert it from a string into an actual table object. But anyways, I want to get back to this operator right here, so you can see how I'm setting this variable HTML to the opening tag for a table, but then I want to keep adding on to it. So I use the plus equal sign. So I keep adding on to my string with the plus equal sign, and then I'm adding each additional row after that. Finally, when I'm done creating my table, I got to make sure it has a closing tag down here on 112, and see what that looks like when this runs. You can just uncomment that code there, and then here's my here's my string, and now at this point I could do some other code and I could actually inject this table right into the page, and you'd see a HTML table there then. Alright, so we do see that this shortcut arithmetic operator quite a bit when we're working with strings. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and I'm going to scroll on down to line 119. Now we're ready to start talking about the comparison operators. So if I bounce back to my page here, that's here, and these are the comparison operators, and you already know what most of these do. So we can see if x is less than or greater than y, or see what the examples are here. These ones, I'm going to gloss over these ones real quick. We talked about these in class, and, but you should know what the less than, greater than, less than or equal to, and greater than or equal to. I'll leave those up to you, but we use those in Boolean expressions. So I've got an example here where here on line 120 we're using the greater than or equal to operator to see if x is greater than or equal to 5. Whoops, looks like I have a typo here, which I'm going to fix. So you guys, this will have been fixed by the time you download this file. So anyways, so you can see how we use those comparison operators in Boolean expressions. Okay, I'll leave it up to you guys to run that code. But there are a couple of these that you may not know what they do, and we'll start. Let's go to this one, the double equal sign. Now we've already talked about this. That's called the equality operator. So we've used this before. If we wanted to check and see if the value of a number or a string was some other value, we use the double equal sign. And we talked about why we can't use the single equal sign, and it's because the single equal sign is the assignment operator, and that's used to assign a value to a variable. But if we want to check to see if a value is equal to something, we can use the double equal sign right here like this. So right here I'm checking to see if x is equal to 5. If it is, we'll see an alert. If not, we won't. So that's called the equality operator. Alright. You can use the equality operator to compare strings also. Now we've already seen code like this, so I'm down here on line 143. I'll uncomment that code. You can see that I'm declaring a variable called guess, and the value that's getting assigned to it is whatever the user enters into the prompt. And the prompt will say, guess what word I'm thinking of. So after they enter it, guess will have a value in it, and then what we're doing here is we're using that equality operator to see if they guessed operators. And if they did, if that was their guess, then we say good guess. Alright, so we can use the equality operator on strings and numbers. We'll put the comments back in here and continue on. So I think we'll skip this. Why do you think we don't use the equal sign to check for equality? And we already mentioned that, and that's because the equal sign, just one of them, is the assignment operator already. So we need to distinguish between when we're assigning values to variables and when we're comparing two values with the equality operator. Alright, so sometimes we want to see if things are not equal, and that's what this operator is. It's the exclamation point followed by the equal sign. So over on our page here, that would be this one. Exclamation point equal sign, or bang equals, if you want to talk like a computer nerd. So let's uncomment this code here. And this is all familiar stuff except for that new operator that we're talking about. So I'm declaring a variable and I'm setting it to a value. And then I'm declaring another variable and I'm going to let the user set the value of that one by this prompt. So it's going to say, what is your first name? And then I have an if statement right here, and it says if my name is not equal to your name. If that's true, if they're not equal, then this code will run and it'll say we have different names. But if we do happen to have the same name, then it will alert hi, whatever your name is, which will be Niall in this case. That's my name too, okay? So that's the not equals operator. go ahead and put this code back in, or the comments back in. Now I want to get to this one. This one is a little bit different. It's the triple equal sign. So let's comment out or remove the comments here on 170 and 185. Okay. So what we got here is a variable called some number, and it's set to a value of 7. And then I've got another variable which I named some string, and it's also set to a value of 7, but if you'll notice, it's a string, and it's a string because we're using the quotes around it. Okay, so both of these variables, some number and some string, they're both storing the same value. That value is 7, but they have two different data types. One is a number and one is a string. Now, we've already seen what happens when we try and combine numbers and strings, and it's different than when we combine numbers and numbers. So it can be important at sometimes for you to know that the data type of the value that you're working with. So what I've got here is an if statement, and it's comparing some number to some string. Now, this equality operator, the double equal sign, that only checks values. So because both of the values here are 7, this will evaluate to true. This Boolean expression will evaluate to true because the value of both of those variables is 7. So that'll be true. And then it'll alert that they have the same value. And I want you to run this to try it out and make sure that I don't have any bugs here. So if that's true, then we go into another if statement, which is nested inside of there. But this time we're comparing them with the triple equal sign. And by the way, that's known as the strict equality operator. Strict because it checks the values of both of these, and it also checks their data types. So if the values are the same, and they are here, and the data types are the same, then this will resolve to true. But because this data type is a number and this data type is a string, this Boolean expression will evaluate to false. Okay, so that's the triple equal sign. And now this is we'll see how we can come back to that problem that we left off with at the end of the if statement video. Go ahead and put my I want you to run this, see what happens, and play with the code if you want. It'll probably be good practice for looking at nested if statements. And down here on line 188, what did I do? Is that duplicated? Anyways, I might have duplicated code here. Looks like it's pretty much, I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to skip that. And I'm also going to skip this too. This is just a function that I created that will check to see if two values that you pass in have the same value and the same data type. So you can pass in anything, and you see there's two parameters here. The function name is check value and data type, and then I run these if statements to check their values and their data types, and it will give you an alert that tells you they have the same value but they don't have the same data type, or they have different values, and at that point we don't care whether the data type is the same or not, because we already know they're different in most cases. Okay, so that's it for the comparison operators. Now there's one more type of operator, and I'm sorry I said we'd solve that problem that we left off with on the if video, but we're going to have to wait just a little bit. We'll have to talk about the logical operators first. So we got the double ampersand sign here, and that's known as the AND operator. And then we also have what we call the double pipe operator right here. It's the two vertical lines. So it's actually, you got to hold the shift key down to make a pipe, and you hold the shift key down and then press the backslash key, and then you'll get a pipe. So if you do that 2 times, you'll get the double pipe, and the double pipe is the OR operator. So what does that mean? Let's talk about this real quick here. Those are called logical operators, and we use them to combine Boolean expressions. So right here on 232 it's saying you've got the AND operator, and then 233 is just demoing the OR operator. Alright, so let's just look at some code here and see how we use these. So So I'm going to remove the comments on 235 and on 247, and let's check out the code. So I've got a variable that I'm declaring named x, and we're letting the user enter a number to set that variable. So we're going to prompt them and say enter a number. And I've got two more variables here, and I'm initializing them in my code. The first one is min, and that's getting set to 1. And the second variable is named max, and that's getting set to 10. Alright, now I have to tell you that anytime the user enters something in JavaScript, whether they enter it into a prompt or into an input tag that you create in your form, if you have a form on your web page, but by default or automatically, JavaScript will treat anything they enter as a string. Even if they enter a number, it's going to get treated as a string. So right here on line 240, I'm actually changing the data type of x right here. So this is this parse int function. So if this is a numeric value, so even if it's a string but it holds a number, then this parse int will be able to convert the data type. So x will now be storing a number instead of a string. That's a little bit confusing. If we need to talk about this more in class, please bring it up. Alright, so on line 240, we're just converting the data type of x from a string to a number. Because like I said, when the user enters data in JavaScript, it's treated as a string even though they might enter a number. Alright, so let's go down to the if statement on 244. So what I've got here, here's our AND operator. So what I'm checking for is to see if x, what the user entered, is greater than or equal to min. And we know min is set to 1. And if x is less than or equal to max, which we put at 10, then this whole thing will evaluate to true. So if this is true and this is true, then the whole thing is going to be true, and we'll see this alert right here. If either one of these is not true, then the whole thing is going to resolve to false, and we won't see an alert right here. So basically what we're doing here with this sample here is we're checking to see if x is within a range, and we set the range of from 1 to 10. So we're checking to see if x is within that range, and we'll do a lot of this sort of thing too. Alright, now let's move on to a little more intricate example here. I'm going to put the comments back in and then scroll on down to line 256. Alright, so we remove the comment on 256 and then the closing comments on 273. Let's take a look at this here. So I've got three variables: Joe likes programming, Betty likes programming, and Sally likes programming, and they're all holding Boolean data types. Look at this. I'm assigning true to the first one, false, and then true. So they're all, the data type of each of these is Boolean right now. Alright, so let's look at our if statement on 261. If Joe likes programming and Sally likes programming, then if both of those are true, then the whole thing is true. So if I look over here, if I look above, I can see that it's true that Joe likes programming, and it's also true that Sally likes programming. Since we're using the AND operator, if both of those are true, then we'll see the alert. So you should see the alert. Now let's go down to 265. Here's another if statement. If Betty likes programming, or, here's the or operator, or Sally likes programming, then we'll see the alert. So let's look at this. Does Betty like programming? No, that's false. But we're using an or operator here. So in the case of an or operator, if one of them is true, the whole thing is going to be true. So since Sally likes programming and we're using an or operator, the whole thing is going to result in true, and we'll see the alert. Okay, hopefully that's hopefully you can wrap your brain around that, because it gets a little more complicated. And I have to say that now Boolean expressions can become really complicated, and I've seen some that just give me a headache before. And here's an example of how we can start to see more complicated Boolean expressions. So look at this one on line 270. So we've got if Joe likes programming and either Betty or Sally likes programming, then the whole thing is true. Okay? So we already know that Betty doesn't like programming, but if you look at this, you can see now the parentheses really help you with Boolean expressions, and you want to start from the innermost parentheses and work your way out. So starting with the innermost set of parentheses here, I can figure out if this is going to turn out to be true or false. So Betty likes programming or Sally likes programming. And since Sally likes programming, this is going to turn out to be true. So in effect, I could just replace this with true right here, because we've already solved that part of the equation. So now it just becomes a matter of, if Joe likes programming and this is true over here, then we see the alert. Okay, so Boolean expressions can be tricky, and there's sometimes when you don't need the parentheses, but I recommend always using parentheses when you're doing stuff like this because it makes it easier to read. For example, if I remove these parentheses here around this Boolean expression, I would get the same result, but it's much easier to read this and make sense of it with the parentheses, because then you can just work your way from the inside out. So the parentheses really help. In some cases you don't need them, but I recommend always using them. Alright, last thing here. Now, if you remember back to our discussion about the if statement, I told you that there are cases here. I'm going to go ahead and comment out that code that we were just looking at. So I'm going to uncomment this code starting on line 280. So I told you last time that a lot of times we can use an if statement to find out if a variable has been set or not. So right here I've got a variable, and when I say set, I mean initialized. So here I'm declaring a variable, but it's not being initialized. It has no value. So you can think of it, for now, just think of it as a null value. It has no value. Actually, in JavaScript, there's a couple of different versions of null, but we don't want to talk about that right now. But just think of it as null, meaning no value. So if I'm not sure if it's been set or not, I can put an if statement here and just simply put the variable right in there. And if it's been set, that should resolve to true, and then this code would run here on line 284. If x has not been set, then this code won't run, but what we'll see is this code running right here. Alright, so that works most of the time with no problem, but I did tell you that there's an exception to this, and that is if by chance your variable is set to 0, because 0 is the same as false in programming languages. I think I told you that 0 and false are considered the same, and 1 and true are considered the same. And I think that's mostly because of the idea that underneath the hood there's a bunch of switches that are either on or off. So a lot of times we talk about them being a 0 or a 1. If it's a 0, it's off. If it's a 1, it's on. And since it's it's one of two states, that kind of falls in nicely with Booleans, because Booleans can only be one of two states, either true or false. But anyways, the point is that 0 and false will be treated as equal, and in that case, if I went back up here to line 281 and put a 0 here, our code wouldn't work right, because x has been set. It's been set to a value. That value is 0. But because 0 is treated as false, this code's not going to run here, even though x has still been set. So I'm missing some semicolons here too. Alright, so how can we fix this? How can we fix this problem? We'll go back down here and we see, now in this case, on line 298, I'll uncomment that so we can see the color coding a little bit better. On 298, we're declaring a variable and we're setting it to x. But we know that if we just put x in the Boolean expression all by itself, it's going to evaluate to false, but even though x has a value set to it. So what we can do is use our OR logical operator, and then we can check to see if x is equal to 0 here. And that way that'll fix our problem. So if x is set to 0, in other words, x has been set, yes, it's been set, so then we want to run some code. So this will fix our problem that we had here. So we check for x first. If this comes out to false, and it will, because 0 is the same as false, but we put an or here, and then we check x again, and we use the strict equality operator to make sure that it's not only is it 0, but it's been set to a number, which is what we're looking for in this case. So, all right, that does it.